A dad's love. With shaky hands, I approached my father, who was manning the grill. Tonight was my grandmother's 80th birthday, and we'd been preparing all afternoon for this special night. I love my grandmother to bits, and I wanted this night to be as amazing as possible for her. However, I could not shake off the nagging feeling that tonight was the night to do this. It was the time to come out. Surely my family ties were strong. I was raised by a family-oriented man, but by no means was I certain that he would be accepting of me if I did come out. But it was now or never. If I did not do it now, I may never muster up the same courage again. I stood in front of the grill, watching my father as he flipped a row of tender-looking steaks. He was a beefy man with graying hair and a well-kept mustache. Although he was showing signs of age, he still looked youthful in my eyes. Perhaps that was because I knew the man he was deep down. He was kind, loving, and an understanding father. I surely hoped this conversation would not be an exception. "You're just gonna stand there all day or try to help me out?" he jested as he placed burgers on the grill. I forced a smile, but I was taking deep gulps of breath and attempting to calm my nerves. Whatever happens, I knew my dad would accept me. Whatever happens, I knew my dad would accept me. But a tiny voice in my head rang. Will he? Before I let the nudging voice get the better of me, I just blurted it out without any warnings. I came out. It was now or never. "Dad, I'm gay." He took one quick glance at me before turning back to the grill, still silent and unreadable. You could almost hear a pin drop because of the silence that ensued, and for a split second, I was worried. I was worried that because I decided that I wanted to tell the world of who I truly am, I would lose the single most important person in my life, my dad. But I shook these thoughts off swiftly too, because deep down, I knew who he was. I knew the man who raised me would never turn his back against me, and I was absolutely spot on. "Like I didn't already know," he said, before turning to me at once. "I love you for who you are, son. I'm happy you finally decided to personally tell me, but I do not think this changes anything. I'm happy as long as you're happy. That's my job as your dad, to support you in all that you do." I gave him a bear hug, tearing up as he rubbed circles behind my back. Internally, I berated myself for even thinking that my dad would not accept me. Of all the people in my life, he was the single most supportive one. Every piano recital since I was a little boy, he was there, front row, and with his old-fashioned camcorder. When my mother forced me to play sports in elementary school, Dad would always be courtside during soccer or basketball games, shouting words of encouragement, while my mother usually sat and fanned herself, shaking her head when I did not live up to her expectations, which is normally every breathing moment. "How?" I asked curiously. My dad chuckled before turning back to his grill. It was adorable how passionate he was for food. He relished cooking for his children, especially me who served as his critique and taste tester. "How? You were drawn to Barbies, so I always made sure when I planned to buy Jen a new ones, I'd have spare ones so you could play them when you thought no one was watching. The way you would eye Chris Evans in pretty much every movie we watched. I've seen that." "Dad," I said, flushing at the mention of my longtime celebrity crush. He patted my back playfully. "Just kidding, son. Or daughter? What do you want me to call you?" I smiled and said the former would do. "But for real, Dad, be serious for once. I'm genuinely curious. Does everyone secretly know?" He shook his head. "No, I don't think so. They probably have their hunches, but I knew from the start because we share a bond." "Father and son bond? Ew," I joked. Seeing my dad chuckle like that made my heart flutter. I wrapped my arm around him as we headed back inside. I knew that as difficult as my next confessions were going to be, I would be okay. I would be okay as long as I had him by my side. All my life, all I have strived for was to be good enough. I wanted to be good enough for myself. I wanted to be good enough to live up to my sister's feats in life. I wanted to be good enough so that, for once, I could feel my mother's affection. Alas, I do not think I would be getting any of that anytime soon. As soon as I delivered what was possibly the hardest speech of my life, I recognized the utter disgust etched on my mom's face. I recognized it because it was all I had ever known all my life. When I was 9 and failed to score a penalty kick to give my soccer team the victory, she had that same look. When I was 12 and almost chickened out of my piano recital, she had that same look. When I was 18 and graduated only second in my class, she had that look. One of my sisters, Blanche, was also unspeaking, but she reached out and hugged me. Same with my grandmother. whose birthday celebration I probably spoiled because of my mother's reaction. Jenna, my other sister, smiled endearingly at me and reached out for my hand across the table, patting it gently. While I appreciated their support, I could not deny the validation from my mother held a different weight in my heart. I sought her love and acceptance. I wish I did not, though, because the rest of my family actively provided where she could not. My only son, gay? She finally broke the silence. I looked down on my plate, not wanting to meet her eyes, lest I see another look of disappointment that will surely haunt me for years to come, or perhaps even the rest of my life. No wonder he could not bring a girl home for the life of him. Producing children was the only useful thing he could do in this house, and it seems he won't be doing it now. Utterly useless. Carla, warned my dad. His fists were visibly clenched at this point, and I knew he was bound to explode any minute now. One thing about my dad was he was a fiercely loyal person. He would defend you even in times where you could not defend yourself. He used to do this all the time with me when I was younger, but eventually taught me how to stand up for myself, for when he was not around. But one person I could not seem to stand up to was my mom. Ironically, the very person who carried me in her womb for 9 months and birthed me was the same one who constantly made my existence a living hell. I finally mustered up the courage to look her in the eye, and how I wish I did not. She looked disgusting. Her own son seemed to disgust her. My mother then rolled her eyes, unabashed by the looks of the rest of the family was giving her. You tolerate this shit? Instead of encouraging the man up, you let him do whatever the fuck he wants, and now look what happened. Sad, isn't it? You will have no one to depend on to carry on your family name because your son is gay. Hatred was so evident in her eyes. Did she resent me that much? By no means did I expect her to welcome me with open arms, but this reaction felt like an all-time low, even for her. I don't care. What's the use of carrying on the name if your son is unhappy? I don't care. What is the use of carrying on the name if your son is unhappy? Would I rather have grandchildren bearing my last name than to see my son happy with his choices in life? No, and I will surely not stand for this disrespect. I agree. Do not speak to my son and my grandson like that ever again, Carla, added my grandmother. All your life, all you've ever done is criticize Gab. Whatever he does, you're always wanting more. That's because he's always doing the bare minimum. He never aimed to achieve the standards of his sisters, nor surpass them. He's a disappointment, and with this, he just proved that he will never be enough. He is enough, shouted my father, standing up and slamming his clenched fist on the table and making the dishes vibrate. He is my son, and you will not disrespect him like that. He deserves the same respect and affection that you give to Blanche and Jenna, and it hurts me to see you treating him like he's disposable. I will not have it. With that, my mother slammed her napkin on the table and pushed her unfinished meal away. She stood up, walking away dramatically before we heard the front door slam shut. Oh, my darling boy, cooed my grandmother as she rushed to hug me. I gave her a tight hug and shook my head vigorously at my mother's display. I'm sorry, Nana. I apologize sincerely. I ruined your night. No, you certainly did not, my boy, she replied, while messing up my already unkempt hair affectionately. The best birthday present I could ever have is for you to be comfortable in your own skin, to see you, Blanche, and Jenny happy, and I hope you can be happy now that you're out, darling. Thank you, Nana, I said before turning to the rest of my family, and thank you all so much. My sisters pulled me into a three-way hug as my father watched across the table, looking elated despite my mother walking out. Well, I guess celebration is still in order. My son, also my mortal enemy, Dad jested, is gay and proud. And of course, it's Nana's birthday. Despite my mother's expected outburst, I was ecstatic. I felt like I belonged. My family loved and accepted me for who I am, and that was all that matters. Learn how to discipline your son, growing up. You never did anything, although you saw signs, and now look what happened. I heard my mother's raised voice. Later on that night, as I laid in bed, unable to sleep. Why did I need to discipline him when he was just being himself? Growing up, he was the kindest, most helpful and loving son. Why would I feel the need to change him? My dad's word made my heart melt. He really was standing up for me. He would stop at nothing to defend me against my mom's non-acceptance. See, this is where you and I are different in terms of parenting. I raised Blanche and Jenna to be strong, independent, and smart women. And you, look at what you've done to your only son. I also raised those girls and I love them to bits. I will not take full credit for raising them because you deserve it too. But don't you dare sneer on Gabriel, Carla. I'm proud of him. You are weak, and I cannot possibly imagine what the rest of the town will say about this. As a Christian, this is humiliating. What's more humiliating is that you're prejudiced against your own son, your flesh and blood. You raised that amazing boy. He is no son of mine. If he declares himself gay, what will the neighbors say? What will my family say? I won't have a face to show them anymore because of your son. It's indirectly your doing too. You are weak. I raised 3 strong, beautiful, and intelligent children, and if you don't respect their choices and what's best for them, then I'm afraid we cannot meet eye to eye, Dad retorted. I do not care what other people will say. If they talk shit, then that says more about them than it does about my children. I'm done here until you get your shit together, I heard my mother reply before the door slammed shut again. I finally decided to stop trying to sleep at once because it was useless. I had just come out to my family, which of whom accepted me and supported me, but I was also shunned by my mother on the same day. The mother whom I admired for her intellect and independence. The mother whom I tried to impress so hard all my life. She was an excellent woman with incomparable credentials, but I still longed for unconditional love from her, even as a 23-year-old. I got up and left my bedroom in search of my dad. I found him sitting on a lawn chair in the garden, staring into space and humming quietly. Hi, Dad, I said as I approached, and pulled another chair so I could sit next to him. Hey, you're up. I nodded and said, I heard your argument. I'm so sorry you were caught in between this. He looked at me intently as he pat my shoulder. Never say sorry. I'm only doing what a father should. I thought my mother would come around after that fateful night, but apparently her egotistic self just would keep on aggravating manners. It was bad enough that she could not accept me for who I was, but she had to rub it in my face every single time. She struck again one peaceful afternoon. I was having Charles, a friend of mine from high school, over, as we were talking about our plans to move into a new city and pursue our shared dreams of starting a band together. I loved to sing, and he played instruments beautifully. We were having some leftover cake and lemonade when my bitch of a mother came barging in. She eyed us suspiciously before raising her eyebrows. Immediately, I could sense Charles's discomfort as he fidgeted with his Apple Watch, while my mother made her presence known by banging possibly every single surface in the kitchen. The air was thick with tension, and Charles looked at me apprehensively. Want another glass? I asked softly to break the awkwardness, and he nodded. We both reached for the glass at the same time, and our hands touched, so I froze at once and looked at him. I was probably flushed, as I always was. My mother's beady eyes could not miss this, of course. How could she? Every move that I made, she made sure she had criticisms to spit about it. She snarled and rolled her eyes. It amuses me how you can fool your stupid father into thinking you want to move out to pursue your non-existent singing career. You just want to be a gay whore, don't you? She started. You disgust me. Sitting in this very house I raised you in and bringing in trash like you. Don't talk about my father like that. Don't refer to my friend as trash. Charles' eyes were bulging, surprised that this woman, who seemed to be the epitome of a caring mother, would say such hurtful things. I should go, he whispered. I'll follow you out, I replied, glaring at my mother, who was looking at us with so much disdain. I don't want to be surrounded by the real trash here anyways. With this, I stood from my chair and saw as she rushed towards me. You son of a bitch. Who are you to call me trash? You came from me. You're nothing without me. I don't know you shit. I don't know anyone who disrespects me shit. With that, I walked away, wondering when this will ever end and hoping that I could one day break free from my mother's oppressive grasp. Smile, people are looking, my mother said stiffly between her teeth. It was Sunday, and being the pretentious religious person she was, she dragged my entire family to church. She was smiling from ear to ear, greeting passers-by and pretending that she did not talk shit about them as soon as they were out of sight. Nancy and Allison, my mother greeted 2 ladies her age and nodded amiably. They were already past them, but their gossip was much too sharp to ignore. I heard she physically hurts her husband when she disagrees with her. Cruel, isn't it? She's the epitome of not everything that glitters is gold, said Mrs. Allison, and I could feel their eyes on my family. I won't be surprised. The other day, I was walking past her house when I heard her calling her only son slurs. He is gay apparently, and she despises it. That was the last straw for my mother, I suppose. She stopped in her tracks at once, and since she was leading the pack, so did we all. My dad put a hand on her shoulder, apparently knowing the kind of temper she yields and attempting to stop it before it even began. But she was much too relentless. She valued her image a lot, and knowing that she was the new chit-chat of town in all the worst ways possible was a hard pill to swallow. She turned around at once and fearlessly approached the two gossiping women. "What did you say?" Anyone else would have been intimidated, but Miss Allison was also a tough cookie, who took no one's shit. She huffed and titted her chin upwards, as if sizing up my mother. "I said you were cruel, and that no amount of makeup, decent clothes, jewelry, and more can cover how your attitude is rotting from the inside." My mother raised her hand as to deliver a slap, but I caught it in a jiffy and stepped in between the two elder women. "Stop," I shouted. "You've done enough damage in your family. Don't embarrass us or yourself further." Her nostrils flared upon hearing this, clearly enraged that I dare stood up to her in public, much less defend another person she saw as a nemesis. "You have no right to say shit to me, you piece of shit. You're the reason why this family is the butt of the joke. Not only have you embarrassed me because you're average at everything you do, but most importantly because you're gay." "That's enough," intervened my father softly, but still firmly and with much authority. I saluted him for his ample patience in dealing with my mother. "That's what everyone is whispering about, right? That's why everyone is looking at me like I have failed, right? Because I raised a gay son? But all of you judgmental fucks can stop your glares and scrutiny now. He is no son of mine. I will never be capable of raising such a failure," my mother spat. I could hear audible gasps as the thickening crowd surrounding us clung onto every word, some shaking their heads at my mother's cruelness, but the others rather passive. "How can you even call yourself a mother? You're embarrassing your own son, your flesh and blood, for your image? An image that wouldn't have been destroyed in the first place had your heart not been filled with so much loathing, prejudice, and judgment." My father stepped up and confronted my mother. "I've spent my entire life building myself up. I've endured nights with little to no food. I have endured days toiling so that I could have enough money to support myself at night. I don't owe you shit. This family should be thankful for me, and yet you pay me back with an embarrassing gay son? One who is incompetent and only knows defiance? That's not true. It is, and it hurts, doesn't it? But that's the truth. Your son's wit is average at the least. I care more about what people whisper about me than my relationship with you. This family is a disaster." "You make it a disaster," I yelled. "Don't raise your voice at me," she screamed back, grabbing me by my hair. I heard audible gasps as we dragged me for a few steps, and my dad was desperately trying to get me off her grasp. "You are one ungrateful fuck, after all I have done for you, and you answer me back in public? Shame on you." "Shame on you, Carla. You stand there and pretend to be the picture-perfect mom, a religious woman and a successful academe. You stand there and pretend that you're a family woman when you just want the good parts of your children. You cannot accept them for who they are. For that alone, you deserve to be shamed and exposed in public like this." With that, my dad clasped my shoulder, turned us both around, and bravely walked out of there with my two sisters trailing behind us, leaving a shaken mother behind. My mother could not show her face to our neighborhood after that fateful Sunday. I was not a tad bit surprised, though. Growing up, she had always been conscious of her public image. I would say she cared more about what people thought of her than how she actually made us feel. It did not matter that my siblings and I were uncomfortable at some of the outward displays she made us do, such as going to church together and looking united as a family. She only cared about how people saw her. She wanted the onlookers to think that she was the glue of the family, the one keeping us afloat and guiding us to success. But apparently, she was not done attempting to destroy my life just yet. I should have known, because a woman with a force like her did not give up that easily, especially when her pride and image was on the line. I found out of her antics because I received a phone call from the landlady Charles and I were talking to. We had intended to move out and live in a new city as mentioned earlier. She phoned me to tell me that she would be returning the deposit that I had transferred days ago and informed me to seek a new accommodation instead. Please, I really wanted this place and we had an agreement. I'm sorry, Mr. Gabriel. I would prefer less drama. This apartment complex is very peaceful, and we cannot have you disrupting its ambience. What do you mean? I asked curiously. I was sent a video of you arguing with a lady just last Sunday, sir. I'm sorry, I cannot lease this place to you. Immediately, I knew the dirty tactics belonged to my mother. Before the Sunday shenanigans, I had been talking passionately of my desire to start a new life in a new city and start my own band. She just had to interfere. I suppose her mindset has always been that. If she could not be happy, we could not be happy either. Her sabotage was even more evident when I received a phone call the next morning from the small record label that Charles and I were supposed to sign with. You're dropping me? Sir Donovan, I beg you, please don't. This has been my dream for the longest time, I begged. I heard him sigh and clucked his tongue. I feel for you, kid. You're one talented guy, but I just cannot afford talent with baggage so heavy. Sending death threats to your mother? We don't tolerate that behavior here. My mouth went agape. Death threats to my mother? I repeated. Uh-huh. She documented some screenshots through your WhatsApp conversation. This is real vile, and you can go to jail for that, kid. Fix your issue with your mom, and maybe then we can talk about getting you another contract. I wanted to cry myself to sleep that night because my mother, despite her banishment from our household, was still actively ruining my life and my dreams. She knew where to hurt me and she hit the bullseye, but I could not. Even as my dreams of singing in a new town were halted, I could not cry because I knew staying here was not so bad anymore. With my father supporting me in all that I do, and my sisters cheering me on, I knew I would be alright. People usually go with their partners, right? Asked Jenna as she was doing my eye makeup for the Pride March later that day. I rolled my eyes jokingly. Well, not usually, but I don't know. It's my first time too. Duh. And you're going with your sisters. Fun, isn't it? Blanche added. I nodded vigorously, elated at the fact that my sisters were truly going all out in this without me needing to ask them. And your dad, of course, he excitedly said, emerging from his bedroom, clad in a black shirt that screamed, Proud Dad. I mentally sighed. Of course, Dad would be extra like that, and have a customized shirt made just for this. But at the same time, I felt my heart flutter. Not only was my family tolerating me, but they accepted, loved, and supported me. It was all I could ask for, especially with the lack of my mother's support. Blanche, Jenna, and my father were more than enough. Not to mention my Nana, who even sent me rainbow cupcakes earlier that day. You're so extra, Dad, I commented at his getup. He did a cute swirl and shrugged. Well, who else taught you all how to be extra, if not me? You got it from the best. I love you, Dad, I whispered. Ew, I can't believe I just said that. Growing up, I had never been that affectionate with Dad. He was more of a man of action, and he did not say he loved us that much, but he definitely showed it. From tirelessly sending us to and from school during our elementary and high school days, despite his long duty hours at work, to patiently helping me with my academic work when I needed. He was there. He loved us through his actions, and he made sure that we not only felt it, but saw it too. I love you, son. I know I don't say it a lot, but I really do. Blanche hugged Dad from behind and rested her chin on his shoulder. My God, Dad, are you crying? She joked. Dad rolled his eyes and playfully shrugged my sister off his shoulder. It was my turn to get up and give him a hug. It surely was not enough for all his silent sacrifices since I was a child, but it was a start. Thank you, Dad, for being my number one supporter, for never judging me or my choices, and always showing me that you love me. Of course. I will always root for your happiness. Where you're happy, Dad is happy. Gab, tell him you'll be happy in Paris so we can all go for a vacation, Jenna joked. We all chuckled. Well, that can definitely happen, so your brother can finally a Parisian man for himself. Dad rode along. Not you being mine and Jenna's new competitor for boys, Blanche said to me. I shook my head and pretended to do a fierce hair flip. Honey, new competitor? I think I've always been the boys' favorite, I joked. If by boys you meant Dad, then you're right. You certainly are Dad's favorite. And I would not have it any other way. When the going got tough, my dad's love persevered, and I owe my freedom and self-acceptance to him to this date. The end. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.